And welcome to Fantasy Literature here at Dragon Con. And tonight we're going to be talking all about intellectual property or infinite profits, just to make Mel happy. So I am Jim Nettles. I am a nonfiction author. I write about futurist topics, technology, privacy, data security. As James B. McDonald, I write science fiction, urban fantasy, bit of horror, bit of this, that, and the other. I'm also the founder of Author Essentials, which is an author services and author education company. And I am one of the founders of Continual Convention that's online. And so I'm going to have my my fellow panelists here introduce themselves this evening. Mel, you're going to go first.
Hi, I'm Mel Todd. I am an author of about 20, 25 books. I keep forgetting to count. And right now, mostly I'm writing urban fantasy and what I call urban science fiction. So I'm here to basically be a pain in everybody's hind end and talk about how very important IP is to any author.
James?
Hey everybody, I'm James A. Hunter. I'm a professional fantasy writer. I've been doing it full-time for about 6 years. I have all those books on the top shelf there are me. I have about 25 or 26 titles, I think, at this point, full-length novels. I write urban fantasy, epic fantasy, gamelet stuff, sort of all over the board as long as it's under the fantasy umbrella. And then my wife and I also run a non-traditional publishing company called Shadow Alley Press. We have about 15 authors that we work with. Most of them are full-time, all writing inside the fantasy wheelhouse, and I'm happy to be here and talking about IP.
Rod.
Hello. Hi, my name is Rod Blecher. I write under the name R.S. Blecher. I've been a full-time freelance writer since 2001. I have published, I believe right now, 10 novels, and a couple more in the pipe. I write mostly urban fantasy, science fiction, horror. Just ventured into kind of, I guess, what you would call urban sci-fi. I actually just had a book come out this last year through Audible, and then it was an Audible original, and then it became an analog, like a physical novel, which is kind of like urban sci-fi. So I actually, Melissa, I want to talk to you a little bit about that, because that's kind of fascinating. I want to hear some about your books.
I love urban science fiction. It's my catchphrase for some of it.
It's great. I mean, and everyone looks at it and goes, "What?" But anyways, been doing this full time for a long time, long enough that I can't remember. And wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
And Marisa.
Hi, I'm Marisa Wolf. I am, in comparison to these other amazing authors, I've been published for about 2 years, but I've been writing for about 36 years. I take those early years seriously. I write science fiction and fantasy, and many points in between. And I currently write in 3 different shared worlds. So am really excited to talk about intellectual property from the point of view of keeping true to other people's visions.
Perfect. So let's actually just sort of set the groundwork, what IP is, intellectual property. And for anybody out there that doesn't know, generally IP is anything that is a product of the mind. It is a new and unique creation that's a product of the mind. And the way we tend to go and protect those, especially for writers, is as a copyright. If we look at things, a lot of the time we'll also be dealing with trademark properties, logos for our businesses, for you guys that have your own publishing houses, for some of the consulting we do, things we do like that. Or even a lot of the time a series will have its own logo or brand. We're into trademarking. Also, with some of the consulting I do, we deal with designs, because I do work with artists out of the UK, as well as patents. But we're not going to be diving too much into those tonight. So, if we start talking about, from your view, because, we've got a wide spread of people that have worked in other people's universes, from a publisher's perspective, all these different areas. Let's sort of dive into what you feel are the most important aspects of IP and making sure you're protecting it, how you're defining it, how you look at it. So, Marisa, I'm going to let you go first. We're going to work backwards.
Oh, good. But I mean, Mel looked very ready for this.
I know.
So I kind of want to hear from her. I'll say for me, the thing that's been most important, again, 2 years in, is like, where are my lines? So just being very clear in the contract what what I own, what goes with me, what the owner of the world owns, what our shared responsibility is, both in the development of the storylines and then also in the profits, and just how that looks. So getting really clear on the front end, just what all those pieces are.
So Rod, you actually came and started in one of those little universes as somebody else's playground as well. I forget which one it is. It's one of those star something.
I'll give you a hint. The very first big kind of break I got was I was published for Simon & Schuster for a Star Trek anthology that they used to do called Strange New Worlds. And I had actually I had written my own original stuff, but I had never tried like an IP story before. And I really loved Star Trek. So I think that the important thing for me when I was doing it was to make sure I had all my ducks in a row as far as the world. So I rewatched the episodes that I had characters that were, I was going to use. There was one specific episode that the main character came out of. He was sort of like the protagonist, or actually the antagonist, in one episode of TNG. And I rewatched the episode, and I just want to make sure I got everything right. I also included Harlan Ellison's Guardian of Forever in there. So I was just waiting to get sued. I was just waiting for someone to knock on my door with the papers from getting sued by Harlan. But I guess he was busy suing someone else that week. So I got lucky. But yeah, that was the first thing I did. But I've had an opportunity to do some other IP projects, and I always think it's important to kind of get to know the playground, get to know the universe before you start really diving into it. You can't really, you have to know the rules before you can break them. So it's really important to kind of know the universe you're playing around, and I think that's a primary thing for me.
James.
Yeah, so I've had a number of different experiences on a number of different fronts when it comes to shared intellectual property. So I write, this is probably a series I'm best known for, Viridian Gate Online. And I have, it's an expanded universe. So I have 7 books in the main series, and then there are about 15 books written by other authors set in the same universe that are, some of them are collaborations, some of them are strictly these authors writing in my universe. I think that everything everyone has said so far is really spot on. You really need to know the universe itself. You need to know who these characters are and where the storylines go. I've also written in someone else's universe. A friend of mine named Dakota Kraut, who has the Completionist Chronicles. I've written a side series in his universe. And it is really important to sort of get a feel for the series to be true to voice. You have your own author voice, but you also have to make sure that you're true to genre, that you're true to tone, that you're true to the tone of the series and the characters that are in there, because you're not writing for your reader base, you're writing for their reader base. I think there's also a number of important legal protections when you talk about IP, and I think that those should actually be the first considerations before you start outlining or write or do anything. This can be on either your own works that are shared in someone else's universe, or brand new IPs that are collaborative in nature. I've done a bunch of collaborative projects, and the very first thing that I do before I start a new IP with a collaborator is I sit down and I write out a collaborator's contract, and I make sure that we both know who owns what, how those rights are going to be exploited, whether I'm going to exploit them as an independent publisher, whether we're going to sell it to a traditional publisher, what rights are included in that, what percentage, who owns what percentage of the intellectual property. And I also make sure to include clauses like termination clauses. What happens if one of the collaborators falls out? This can happen in shared universes as well, where maybe you're brainstorming and workshopping an idea with another writer, you build out an outline, and then suddenly they bail on you. And all of a sudden you have this brilliant outline with these great characters, but this person contributed a bunch of those ideas to this thing. And so now can you legally use that? Well, not if you don't have that collaborator's contract. There's a good chance that you won't be able to use it without risk, legal action on the part of the other author. So I think that really nailing down some of the legalese of IP is really important before you do anything else, because otherwise you run the risk of basically generating a really cool story that you end up unable to write for a multitude of different reasons. So those are a bunch of the considerations that I look at going into it. And then on the publisher side of things, obviously when I'm working with authors, I want them to make sure they know which rights we get to exploit, when rights will be reverted to them. If we don't produce an audiobook in 32 months, they get the rights back to produce that audiobook on their own. So to make sure that everyone knows exactly sort of where the lines are of who owns what, who can do what with what and when. Those are the things that I really consider.
So Mel, I know you're biting, you're chomping at the bit to get here.
Come on.
So I approach it a little bit differently. Both Marisa and Rob, and even James to a certain point, are talking about it when you're just talking about the creative and how do you do it correctly. I think about it a little bit differently. I have my idea, my world, my stories. That's what this is. Every single time I do something with it, if it's a print book, that's me using my IP. If I do an audiobook, that's me using my IP. If I have, like with my series, I actually had graphics and stuff created. I own these. This is part of my IP. This is stuff I own. If I really want to make money, and trust me, I really want to make money, I want to start licensing out parts of that. So I want to talk to Bobblehead and get them to do stuff. That's how I use my IP. I want to get options on my stories to do TV series, to do movies and stuff. That's all part of things you can do with your IP. I know people who are doing card games off of their stories, their worlds, people who are doing role-playing games, people who are doing short films, people who are doing T-shirts and graphics. IP is your intellectual property and how you use it. So it can be as limited as, oh, I want to write a book, and that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. Or it can be as huge as, I want Star Wars. I want people to cosplay. I want people to wear jewelry. I want people with T-shirts. I want people that, have to get credit to use the fonts that I have created. I mean, it can be everything in between that. And so IP is never one of those things that you run out of. It is something that it's how else can you leverage it? Because it is your world. And as long as you retain control of it. Now, this is going to be a teeny tiny bit of contract slamming. And I am just as guilty of this because I'm a small publisher. And so my contracts are pretty explicit. But James was talking about if the audiobook, they don't do it in 32 months, you get your rights back.
That's just us personally.
Yes,
yeah.
But that's actually a good thing because you're saying, hey, if we can't do it, you get to go do it. Lots of publishers will say, well, we get all of it. If anybody wants anything from your IP, we get access to it.
Yes.
And the limits of what you can do, there aren't any. And that's one of the things that it's really a struggle, especially when you keep going like, okay, you tell me that I'm going to be on a panel with Jim Butcher. I'm going to be sitting here going, oh my God, I'm not good enough to be next to Jim Butcher. Are you insane? But my IP can be as powerful as anybody else's if I leverage it correctly. And that's why I was being such a pain saying no, IP equals eternal or infinite profits. Because I can make comic books, I can do movies, I can make shoes, I can make soap, I can do anything I want based off of my worlds if I'm both creative enough and can figure out how to do it. The figuring out is much more difficult than what it seems sometimes.
And I think, go ahead, Rob.
I wanted to mention something in regards to something Melissa had said. I sold my first novel to Tor without an agent. And the initial contract was they owned everything. Everything. Yep. Once I got representation, we went on to sell the second book in that series and the first book in another series to Tor. And I suddenly got to keep my, she had negotiated my audio rights, a couple other things. And that has proven over the years to be very advantageous and very profitable. So you're absolutely right. Some publishers, and again, I'm not going to throw any shade on Tor because they were great and I've enjoyed all the times I've worked with them. But that initial contract was definitely more so in their favor than what came later.
Well, and always a business is always going to try to take as much as they can, and so that's why I'm very big on you wouldn't believe how many authors I run into who don't understand what life of copyright means.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and I'm like going, you have to understand what you're selling, because there is a very, very bad trend in authors going, oh, well, I just wrote a romance. It's not that big a deal. Oh, they're going to pay me $5,000 for it. Awesome. Why would I expect anything else?
Well, and I mean,
we've got to change that.
Well, and this is part of the reason I enjoy having these conversations is it's the difference between knowing I'm writing as a hobby or I'm writing as a business. Because if you're a small publisher, if you are a large publisher, if you are an author, if you're doing any of these things, you own a business. I mean, that's the part of it that everybody has a hard time facing at some point, is when they get that realization of separating the product I'm creating, which is the IP, from the business side of actually running those operations and the contracts, and knowing that a contract is where you start. You know, the first contract that comes out, everything is negotiable. You know, and everybody, until the signatures go on that piece of paper, have a right to walk away. And that's one of those things that everybody has to be prepared to do. If you're looking at a contract and understanding your rights and understanding all the moving pieces, because you hit on exactly where I wanted to go, which is there's all sorts of things that can be licensed or not. I mean, famously, the reason that George Lucas is
George Lucas.
Yeah, is George Lucas.
Healthier than God.
Is because he was smart enough to hold on to the product rights, the licensing rights for merchandise. Because at that point, the film industry didn't really look at it. And I mean, he had a vision and said, well, there's a shot here to create toys and t-shirts and all the rest of this. And I think it by far exceeded those expectations, but it's also part of what created the brand the way it did.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say, you know, in the writing industry, in the publishing industry, the early days were, we're going to write, you know, we're taking the print rights. Nobody was looking at ebook rights, or they may have just done a universal grab of all rights. Well, that meant you didn't necessarily have the ability to negotiate for ebooks, especially in the early days of how that was priced. Audiobooks, I mean, all these different pieces. So you have to know how and what you're licensing to someone to use your products.
And the first contract I had, I ran it past a friend of mine who was an attorney, but he was more of he had been a prosecutor. So he had some business law in law school, but he looked it over and said, I don't see anything here where they're going to like gouge you or anything like that. But also it was so different once I had an agent, because she knew what each of these little clauses could mean as far as like viability for profit. And we've actually, you know, over the years talked about discussing like, well, can we get these rights back from this contract so we can do something with them ourselves? And that's kind of an ongoing thing. So I think it really, anybody who's just getting into the business, if there was some resource or some place they could go to just get like a down and dirty on, this is what you're negotiating. And to be honest, you know, there was no way in heck I was going to not sign that contract, because this is my first book, and it was like a dream come true. It was, but the fact of the matter is once a professional looked at the next contract, she got me a better rate. She got me a lot of things that I couldn't get for myself. So it would be nice to have some kind of a resource like that. You know, I know there's like author
there's a couple.
But I'm not familiar with any.
SIFLA has some pretty good stuff on their website in terms of like sample contracts that you can look at, and sort of boilerplate contracts that you can look at and review, which have been really helpful. I would say, you know, to that point, that one of the things that especially new authors that I see a lot is a lot of authors are extraordinarily self-conscious and struggle with imposter syndrome and need validation. What? And so they will jump.
What do you mean new authors?
And also old authors. It's true. It never really goes away.
Yes,
but particularly with new authors, I think that, you know, they will jump oftentimes at anything that's presented to them.
Yes.
And just the idea that they might actually get to be a published author, you know, and so they're you know, there are a lot of these predatory companies out there that know that too, and are more than happy to exploit them and basically take the IP for the life of copyright and everything that's associated with it, and give the author a pittance in exchange for them getting to be a real author. And so I think that, you know, understanding how valuable your IP is over the long term, and really breaking it down, looking at the analytics and saying, wow, this book could make this much money. This is the series value on this. This is how much my audiobook rights are worth over X period of time. If I'm signing my ebook rights away for 35 years for $5,000, is that really a good deal? Because could I make more than that over a 35-year period? Yeah, probably. Yeah. So I mean, really understanding those values as a new author will save you a lot of heartache in the back end.
And if you're dealing with if you're dealing with film rights, have an IP attorney, have an entertainment attorney negotiate it for you.
That's actually one of my.
I mean,
go ahead, please.
I will say it totally proves I'm a child of the 70s. Knowing is half the battle. And yes, I will go G.I. Joe, go Joe right after that.
That's right.
But the biggest problem sometimes is not knowing what you don't know. The best resource I have found is, her name is Kristen Catherine Rush. She writes a blog called Chris Writes, K-R-I-S Writes. She writes a blog every Thursday that is called Business Musings. She talks about licensing. She talks about IP. She talks about agents. She talks about contracts. She pulls no punches, and she actually gives you hardcore examples, and she will respond to every comment if you ask her on her blog. But when I started this, I took a full 5 months to read 4 years of back blogs on her website just to catch up because and a lot of it had changed. And she said, I said this 2 years ago, this isn't accurate anymore. But if you don't know this stuff, so James was saying 35 years. Most people don't realize that if you sign a contract, it's for life of copyright. But if you petition them at 35 years, they actually have to give you your copyright back. But if you don't do it, they don't have to. And then it's the life of copyright, which is until you die plus 70 years. I don't know about you, but I'd like to be writing for a long time. I don't want to give anybody, 100+ years of rights to my stuff.
Well, and so, let's actually talk about some of the other things that kind of get into rights. And I want to see how everybody feels about these. Because it's going to be one of those things I think hits a lot of the people that are going to be watching this. And so one of the first things I actually want to talk on and kind of quick is fanfic. There's a lot of writers that get started. That's where a lot of people get started. However, there's a lot of implications to allowing fanfic to go on. Yeah. So, from your perspective, there's a balance between, is it good for marketing? Is it help build a brand? And where does it put your rights at risk? So I'm going to throw that to you guys. Who wants that one first?
I'll take that one.
Ready?
Please, after you.
Go, please. I mean, she's cackling. She's got to go first.
No, I'm cackling.
I love it.
So I've been writing fanfic for about 10 years. I still publish regularly under Nye Corson. Mostly I do Buffy fanfic because I happen to love my Xander.
Oh.
It is one of those things where you have to pay attention. And most of the fanfic sites are really good about it. Anne Rice, she doesn't want fanfic done of her stuff, so nobody does fanfic of her stuff. Anne McCaffrey used to say that, but finally she took it back a few years before she died and said, you can write fanfic about her world. You cannot write fanfic in using her characters. Mercedes Lackey is the same way. You can write fanfic, you just can't use the characters that she's named for the most part. Okay? Now, you've got the other extreme, which is Joss Whedon, who's like, oh my God, write fanfic about everything. Write every story you can think of. So for me, I had been writing fanfic because it was fun. It gave me something to do. And it's an instant gratification thing. But at the same time, I've developed a good fan base because they've liked my writing.
Right.
And they trust that I know how to tell a story and that can carry on. Now, I ever go? You have a question, Jim?
Well, no, I was going to say, it's not only that, but it's also about that other side of it is, frequently it's how can somebody turn your characters, how can somebody turn your story, how can somebody influence your world if you're allowing fanfic? I mean, if you don't set the parameters, it's all about what are the rules you set. And I think that's the thing is if you start establishing brand, make sure you set the rules as to what you're willing to allow to go in your world.
Oh, please, God, write fanfic on my stuff. Because no matter what, I cannot tell you how many people I have done across, because I do lots of crossovers, have said, oh, I never read the series or watched the series you did the cross with. I've now gone and read everything. And that actually allows you to spread fan bases to other things. I've done Stargate crosses, I've done NCIS, I've done Tom Clancy, and they're like, oh, I didn't realize this was such a good author. So
You're welcome.
but
All right,
remember,
Ron. I know you're popping.
Well, one thing I wanted to say is, if you are big into Star Trek, CBS in the last few years has just clamped down on all of the fan productions and things like that. And I'll be honest, I think that is to their detriment, because I think that if someone is that passionate about your IP, you should encourage that. I mean, you want to make sure they're not making money off of your ideas, but these folks are actually spending a lot of money to do these productions. They
keep the fan base alive.
Yes, and I think a lot of the big fan bases right now are going through some turmoil, because a lot of them have kind of seem to have gotten to a place where it's like, well, we don't really need the fans. Or, CBS is the one that jumps out at me, because they basically seem to be really interested in keeping everything kind of under their control. And it's a little too late for that, because, I mean, Star Trek fandom is one of the first fandoms, really. And
it is.
But
I mean, look at Veronica Mars. Their fan base saved.
Yes.
And
Firefly.
made the series.
Yeah.
So did Star Trek. I mean,
so did Star Trek. Fanfic has very, very rarely that I've ever seen any evidence of actually hurt anybody, because it keeps your fans alive and waiting.
Yeah.
I don't care how fast I write. I can't write as fast as people can read.
And the original Trek fans, they basically had 3 years of the original show and then this desert. So they kept the show alive, and they actually really encouraged it to become a movie franchise and everything else. I have been very fortunate. I've actually had people want to write fanfic about my stuff.
I love it.
And I am really flattered by that. And I've tried to sort of, everything I've read so far that has been kind of sent my way, they're kind of like writing in my universe, but they're not really writing with my characters.
Yeah.
And I'm totally cool with that. And actually, two of the characters that are real prominent in Brotherhood of the Wheel, which is one of the series I've got going, which is actually optioned right now for TV. And maybe someday it'll actually become a TV show. But two of the characters in there start out as Tuckerizations. They won me at RavenCon to put them in my book.
Nice.
And I ended up making them like secondary characters in the whole book, because it was just fun. I didn't really want to kill them off. So, and actually, just in the last few months, I started up a Patreon, and one of the tiers in the Patreon is you can basically work like a Tuckerization into one of my series, if you're willing to.
Yeah,
that's very cool.
So I think it's fun, because it really engages you with your fan base, and I'm sorry, I don't think I'm ever going to be a big enough author where I'm just like, I don't want anyone messing with my world. I think it's a great flattery. It's very flattering to have someone do that and want to be that interested in your books.
But real quick, because I think there's a legal thing though. So where copyright is concerned, and it's the author that owns the copyright, the author can choose whether or not they want to enforce the copyright on something like fan fiction. And Rice could totally go in and shut it down and say, no, I don't want this. It's infringing my copyrights, and they could do that. But if something is trademarked, you have to do it. You have to like the rules of trademark are, you have to vigorously enforce your trademark, otherwise your trademark lapses. And so that's why a lot of those big companies, even if like on the surface they might be okay with people making it, they can't let people make those things, because it will be seen as them not vigorously defending their trademark, which opens up other companies to be able to infringe on the trademark, because the precedent has already been set that they don't defend their trademark. And when that happens, you can lose your trademark.
The other thing I would add, though, and I would also just add in there, one, like, I got my start as a fan fiction writer for 20 years, Anne McCaffrey. I know all of the like ins and outs of what she did and didn't allow and when and where she stepped in. And the thing that I have taken to heart is very much the like, I can't see it. You do what you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Do not send it to me. I will not open it. I do not want to know where it is. I cannot see it, because the piece that has come back to bite authors in the ass is somebody has this great idea and they write it in your world. And then you also have the same idea.
Yes.
And you write it in your world and they're like, I put this on fanfiction.net 3 years ago. That's mine. And it doesn't happen a lot, but it can happen. And so I think just to make very clear, like, please God, yes, write fan fiction. I love it. It makes my heart so warm. Don't tell me about it. Like, you can tell me you do it, but I don't tell me details. Definitely don't send it to me, and I don't want to know where it is. And I think that's just really important.
When I first started out, I went to a bunch of writers that I kind of idolized and said, hey, can you read this stuff and tell me what you think of it? And almost every single one of them was like, no, I really can't. Because you could come back and sue me in 20 years and say that this idea that I came up with was from your story or whatever. So I totally get it. The thing with, like, for example, with CBS, they let the fans do this stuff for a long time without any seeming repercussions. And I do understand they have to enforce the trademark, but it just seemed kind of capricious. It was sort of like nothing, and then dropping, the cage down on top of everybody.
The band hammer just on all of it.
Yeah, exactly. Boom. And actually, CBS had a litigation with Star Trek Discovery that I don't know if they got a lot of press or not, but they had a guy who claimed that they stole a lot of elements from Discovery from his video game. And
I do remember.
So I can see where I can see both sides of that. I think it's good for the fandom. A lot of times, if it really wouldn't hurt CBS to say, we're going to kind of oversee what you're doing, and if you cross a line, we're going to shut you down. But they seem to just kind of go across the board and shut everybody down, and it has engendered some kind of bad blood with the folks who are creating that IP, creating that product.
Well, and
remember, there's a difference between trademark and copyright. They're two completely separate things.
But a lot of the reason that a lot of this lockdown started happening again was when they had the revisions of the copyright and IP laws basically the Sonny Bono Act, which is what locked down, and I think that's what a lot of people don't remember. But really, it's Sonny Bono that finally busted the Disney hold on everything, because
way to go, Sonny.
Yep. The mouse is the one that's held on to a lot of the copyright laws and a lot of the IP laws for a very long time. They had the width, they had the power, and of course, the first thing that happens is as soon as the mouse fell out of protection, Lego came out and produced the Steamboat Willie black and white Lego set of the Steamboat, which was a great, which was number one, a great way to honor and say, really thankful you've protected this for all this length of time, and by the way, we're going to start having fun with your stuff. But if you look at that kind of IP and now products. So James, you're writing lit RPG. Are you also looking at getting deeper into, actually having that turned into RPG games, card games, that side of things?
We've done a number of that. We're in talks with a couple of RPG game developers and producers, and working with some material with them. So those are all areas that we definitely want to go into. And I think it's a little bit like Melissa said. Those are rights that you can exploit, and if you can find a way to exploit them, you can make good money off them. And even if you don't make huge money off them, it's all residual income, right? Because the bulk of my money is going to come from my books and from my audiobooks. But it's great if you can find a way to take this thing that's already making you money. You've already done the work. You don't have to do the work again, and finding new ways to bring new funnel points and new access points into the series. Because if you have an RPG game, let's say, even if people even if it doesn't make you a lot of money, it's expanding your market reach and your fan base, and it's going to funnel people back into the source material, which is your books and your audiobooks, which is where I'm going to make the bulk of my money. So anytime I can find a new funnel to bring people into my work, I think it's great. And absolutely. There's a lot of parallels with video games or tabletop gaming with some of the stuff that I write that seems like a sort of natural and easy fit.
Well, and I mean, it's also one of those things that sort of deepens that brand, because if you come out and you say, so like, if you're writing in the Pathfinder universe, like Chris Jackson writes a series of books that are in the Pathfinder universe, I absolutely could see, the Four Horsemen universe becoming a tabletop.
Yeah.
I'd love to see the Four Horsemen universe as a, yes,
It is.
which is one of those things that I wanted to throw out there. So Marisa, if you were thinking in terms of having some of your work, your characters turned into that kind of universe, A, how do you feel about that? And B, how excited are you to then, see figures, miniatures, cards?
Yeah. I mean, how lucky am I that like the first shared world I got to be in is the Four Horsemen? It's pretty freaking awesome. So the first time Joy Wandry at Spinner's End Studio makes hunters. So our books are the cat assassins, the aliens that look like cats and are the most feared assassins in the galaxy. She makes them. And the first time I held it in my hand, I made a noise that only dolphins could hear. So I think that answers the question, right, of like, how do I feel? It's so cool. And the thing about the shared world that is really cool, at least with Four Horsemen, is there are different authors like own different races. So if other authors are writing them, they'll reach out so you can
That's cool.
collaborate and keep them true and like just really make it feel streamlined and connected. And like if a character kind of bounces from book to book, which a character that I wrote, Jody Lynn Nye wrote in an anthology, and I cried real tears. It was amazing. And there's another character I wrote that has popped up in 3 different authors' books. So they'll send me those scenes and I'll get to see them and say like, yep, this is true, or I need to tweak this a little bit, or here's this thing. I got a little away from your question, but it's with real excitement. So
Well,
yes, I want to see them.
I have a follow-up real quick for her on that.
Go ahead.
So just out of curiosity, how Chris and the folks over there handled that. And I know Chris fairly well, but I don't know how you guys like structure the world and the IP stuff. But if it's a character that you create and then is used in subsequent works that you are not involved in, do you have some kind of IP stake in those books or in those short stories? Do you make any kind of percentage of royalty? Is there any of that, or is it just kind of like, do you have a joint agreement going into it that any new material that you create can be used in the expanded universe even without you getting paid?
Yeah, good question. For Horsemen, the main rights are Chris and Mark as the creators, for sure. And then so when my character pops up, it is not like I don't get a percentage of that. I do get sign off, so it's more of a creative piece. And then what really helps is somebody will read that. There are 56 books in the Four Horsemen universe. So somebody sees this character and they're like, where did they come from? And then they go back and buy my book. So I still it feels like it's the rising tide lifts all boats situation with Four Horsemen, and I've really seen that play out so far.
Yeah, it's actually the reason I threw the question out there was I wanted to have that conversation, but I wanted the excitement first. Because when you start looking at, and the other part of the question I wanted to hit on was with those rights for the product rights. So when you start signing the contracts for the product rights, when you start seeing those things come into fruition, and those things start showing up in the store, what was that contract process like for you to look at that from the physical product rights?
Yeah, so the physical products still are Mark and Chris's. So Mark and Chris are the owners of the universe. So that is their thing. I think with games, it might look slightly differently. There are different authors who are involved at different levels in creating the games, and so that might look different. It's a good question. I think it's one of those things we're all learning a bit as we're going and building those things, but Joy creates the hunters, Joy sells the hunters. Mark is the creator of the universe. We actually didn't create, Casey and I didn't create the hunters. We did all the building of them, or a lot of the building of them, but actually Chris invented them.
And I've seen that. I mean, that's similarly structured to so like with my own expanded universe, like this is my universe. I created these stories and they were popular enough that people were like, hey, we should have more. And authors made a lot of money writing those stories in that universe. So in terms of the IP rights, like that's something that I own, and it's something I'm fairly covetous of, because I don't want to sort of dilute the IP ownership that I have by splitting it X number of ways with authors, even if I really like them. And so they get, royalties on any books that are produced or any, adaptations from those books that are produced, but it doesn't go past that. And if there are new characters or new material in those books, I have the right as the series universe creator to fold that into other books or other ways. But then with like co-authored books where it's like a fresh IP, we always make sure to have the collaborators contract where we split up. Okay, now, maybe there's a senior author who came up with the idea and owns, 60%, and the junior author owns 40% of the merchandising rights, or however it is that you want to structure it.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing I like about just CKP as a whole, and sounds like yours as well, James, like just so straightforward about that. So this wasn't something that was like tricky or hide the ball or like take advantage of the new author at all. It was very clear. Hey, this is what's going on. This is what you're going to do. And honestly, if I just published my first book without doing the 4 Horsemen, I mean, maybe people would buy it, maybe they wouldn't. But if I get to pull 4 Horsemen fans into whatever new universe I build, like that was something that was that's for me to decide.
Yeah, no, and I've done that, right? I mean, I've published in other people's universes where I don't have any rights because I know that it's another funnel for their readership that's going to come back in and they're going to find my book. So yeah.
So Mel
has different thoughts.
Yeah. So go ahead.
I actually know. I had a question for everybody, and it does tie into this. Have any of you, and I'm sorry if it's morbid, but that's my life lately, addressed your IP rights in your wills? Because I know I have.
Let me
just had that conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, let me talk about that because I worked on the SIFWA survivorship and IP rights kit that'll be going up on the SIFWA site. It'll be a free resource for authors out there. I was one of the contributors to it and going through. But yes, IP is one of those things and it's one of those things to be very important about how you detail out those IP rights and those survivorship benefits. Because again, ironically enough, with the new copyright laws and the way that works, survivorship, death actually becomes a trigger event. So, and actually can change how your rights are structured. So that's one of the things I had to dive into. So let's talk about that a little bit more from a rights and an ownership standpoint. It's not only about survivorship, it's also about caretaking in the event that something happens to you, you're incapacitated, and also making sure how those rights work. We're working with a client right now where we're actually trying to build the survivorship rights so that they will actually, on death, be transferred into a trust for the university. So, there's a lot of things that you can do. But for you guys, how do you view your rights, especially for survivorship, movement to family, movement to rights?
Well, so I don't know the rest of you super personally. I don't have children. I never will. So I know that I purposely looked at it and went, I don't have kids. I don't have anybody I need to leave my estate to. And I have a IP property that's owned 50% by me and 50% by the co-author. And so I talked to him. I said, look, I'm setting it up so that a couple things. When I die, all of my IP rights for my company is going to go to fund a couple charities that I support. And I have talked to a friend who's at least 3 decades younger than I am, and I'm going to have her manage it. And I have it set up so that a certain percentage goes towards the charities, a certain percent goes into the company so she can pay for covers and marketing and stuff. And then she gets a certain percentage of it because the more money she makes, the more money she gets. But I said at the time of my death, the IP rights that I hold on this 50% go back to you, or if you are not alive, they go to your children because he does have kids. And quite frankly, at that point, I'm going, yeah, most people are like, oh, you should always keep the rights. I don't need them. I would rather them go back to him and back to his kids because all my stuff, I am primarily supporting RAIN and animal foundations.
Nice.
So there's no reason for me to keep that, but you have to have somebody to manage it because if you don't have somebody to manage it, they just sit there and Amazon goes, okay, we're sending checks and nothing is ever going to happen with it again.
Yeah.
So Rod, since you're a recent grandpa.
Aw.
Congratulations.
2 weeks ago. Thank you.
Oh my God.
Ooh, wow.
Beautiful. She's beautiful. I have everything set up for my royalties when my children were both underage, I had a friend of mine who is pretty much like my brother, and my royalties were set up to, he would be administrating those if anything happened to me. And now I have it set up for my kids to split 50-50. But to be honest with you, I had never really considered my IPs, and that's something I need to address now, because I really had not thought about it before this. So I'm really glad I got on here.
Well,
but,
and it's one of those things where I wanted to make sure the person managing it is making money off of it, because otherwise they don't have a reason to manage it well.
Right.
And
right.
we have learned the hard way. You need to do new covers every couple of years.
Yes.
You need to do new marketing. And so I'm trying to break it up to give her money to be able to do it, but give her money to give her incentive to do it.
To do it. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like do you want, if you have left a storyline unfinished, do you want Brandon Sanderson to finish writing it? Which I feel like the answer to that is yes. Or if you want it to...
Always yes. Yeah, Brandon Sanderson can finish any of my books. I don't even have to die. Brandon Sanderson, if you want to come in and write my books,
you know, come on, so productive. Or do you want it like George R.R. Martin has been very clear, like Game of Thrones dies with him. If he dies, it goes nowhere. And so it's is that
going
sort
nowhere
of
anyway.
No. What do you want to happen? I think that is such a good question, Mel, of like who gets to continue it, if anybody, or does it go to like a trusted co-author? Does it go somewhere where like, hey, keep writing this, making money, and these things are going to happen with it, etc. I think it's just important.
I have a Robert Jordan.
Here's the hard truth,
story,
and I know this the hard way. That when you die, you will have absolutely no idea that you're about to die, and your will not be updated to say, go approach Jim Butcher or Brandon Sanderson.
Sanderson to write this.
So
novel.
you pretty much have to make sure that you're updating your will every couple of years as you age, so that the person who you're choosing to administer it is somebody who actually knows writers.
Yeah,
because
there's some properties like Roger Zelazny's estate that have been
languishing.
Yes,
horribly.
And so it is important, but it's honestly not something
if
that
somebody
I think a lot
wants
of
to start
folks
a
think
good
about
business, Jim, a business that authors could like say they will run and do these charities, that would actually be a pretty good business model at this point.
Are you trying to add more product lines for what we're doing here? I mean,
Jim, I'll come work for you. Let's do it. Let's do this thing.
No, I mean, I'm going to come check out some of your resources, because my wife and I, we set up our will, and but honestly, it was hard. We had to sort of scrounge together resources to figure out like, how does this work? And I feel like we gave it a good, solid college try. But that's not something that we were intimately familiar with before. And so we did our best. All of the royalties are taken care of, and they'll go into our trust for our kids. And I appointed a literary, one of my co-authors that is really familiar with my books to take care of some of the IP stuff and to finish series, outstanding series. But I feel like there's probably things that if I went and I looked at my will, I'd be like, yeah, that could be better. That could be more clear. How these rights work, whatever it is. So, I mean, it's what we have in our will right now is pretty, it's pretty rough work. I mean, I think it's passable work, and that my stuff's not going to like go to the state because it's not, at least it's been documented somewhere what I want to have done with it. But I definitely feel like that's an area where I could grow and learn more and figure out how to do it better.
I was going to be nice and not do this, but my shameless plug, if you can actually see it. Oh yeah. Oh wait,
hey, that's a great book. I have that.
How good that is.
It's not a shameless plug if people need it. So
I read that book and it was amazing. It was much better than Cats. I want to see it again and again.
So here's
I'll
my
expect
public
the check.
service
I'll see the check later.
announcement.
Yeah, I'll send it to you, Rob.
Public service announcement. And again, I know all this stuff the hard way. With your will, make it like on daylight savings time, whatever. Print out all your passwords to things like my identifiers, to your Boker, whatever, and fold it up and put it in the will,
I'll have to
because
clear my
whoever
browser.
gets it,
Someone will have to clear my browser. It's really important.
I don't even
Rod,
care if
for-
they can
for a
see
check,
what's
I
in
can
my
take-
browser.
Rod, for a small fee, I can take care of scrubbing your entire existence.
But I tell you, trying to get into some of these accounts when somebody is gone is
yes.
almost impossible.
Yeah.
Well,
Seriously. Print out your passwords and put them with your will and update it every daylight savings time. Because
That is
you have no idea the
a
amount
great idea.
of
Yeah.
headache you will save. And you want to know the most important password to include? Give them the password to your phone.
Your phone.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because
I am telling you, again, I learned this the hard way. This is where everybody keeps everything. If you can't get into the phone, you can't tell people.
Yeah.
So we're kind of coming up on time here. And I mean, like I say, we could keep going for at least another couple of hours just based on the list of stuff that I've got. But here's what I want to do. I want everybody to, give us one last thing that you think a new author needs to know, or even a practiced author needs to know. I mean, the one thing I always preach is this: remember, money flows to the author. If you're working with a publisher and someone says they're a publisher, money flows to the author. If someone says, write me a check and I'll be your publisher, they're not a publisher. That's the one big thing I'm going to preach. Beware the scams, writer beware. Always go with the people you know and trust. So I want you guys to kind of give, what's the one thing you want people to know, especially if we can keep it around the IP, the property, the business side of stuff. So we'll go the other direction. So Mel, we're going to go with you first.
Take a look into licensing. I was telling Marisa this earlier. There are 3 licensing expos a year: Las Vegas, Tokyo, and London. This is where people go to buy IPs. When you get to the point that you actually have some IPs in your catalog, go. They're free, except for, of course, the hotel, the airfare, etc. But go and listen and see. Because I don't know about you, but I'd be willing to sell my non-existent firstborn for Marvel to buy my IP.
Rod?
I have learned every day how much I don't know about this business. That seems to be a continuing thing. But the best thing I think I ever did personally for my career was I did attach myself to a really excellent agent. And I do think that is, it gives me an intellectual property attorney that goes through this stuff for me, which I'm very thankful for. And I have someone who's going to those events and those book fairs and IP type events, conventions, and advocating for me. And actually, she has gotten me some pretty decent work that way. So I know some folks prefer not to go with an agent, and that's a whole. I asked a lot of people, and I went through a lot of kind of a courtship before I got to my agent. But I'm very thankful that I did. I think it really helped my career, and it continues to help my career. So I think that's something that a new writer should consider. And again, no agent is going to ask you to pay them money to read your manuscript. If they start doing that sort of nonsense, you run in the other direction, because that's not someone that you really need to be dealing with. But there are a lot of great agents out there, and they can really help you, and they can open up resources to you that you maybe as an individual don't have. So that would be my advice.
Marisa.
Know what you want. So go in knowing, I want this to be a business. I want this to be a hobby and just to see my name in print. I want to be whatever it is. Like, decide. It can change. It can absolutely change. But that's going to be the lens that you look at every contract, every opportunity to share what that is. What do you want this to be? As wild and big as you want it. And also what Jim said first.
Oh, wait, people agreeing with me. That always gets me in trouble. James.
I waited till the end. It's fine.
If I had a single piece of advice, particularly around IP, I would say, I know you want to work with your friends. I know you want to work in someone else's universe. I know you want to collab on that project with your good buddy. For the love of God, get it in writing. Who owns what? and how it's going to work if someone bails. Because if you don't do that and you come up with a really cool story or half a book, it's going to hurt really bad when you have to shelve it indefinitely because you don't actually have the rights or own the rights to publish that work or to sell it to a publisher. So for the love of God, get a short 1 or 2 page collaborator contract and just work it out with the person you want to work with before you start exchanging ideas. It's going to make your life so much better in the long run.
Always have a contract.
Yes.
All right. Well, guys, this went really fast for an hour. So if you can let everybody know where we can find you. So Mel, I'm going to go first with you this time.
This time. My name's Mel Todd. You can find me under Badash Publishing or Badash Books. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Not that I'm that good at any of them. And my current series right now is the Twisted Luck series. And book 3 was just sent to the editor because I suck and life has been harsh. But it was just sent to the editor. So in theory, it should be out in September.
Ooh.
James?
You can find me at shadowalleypress.com. That's the publishing company that my wife and I run. All my books are listed there, as well as the books of our other authors, or at authorjamesahunter.com. I'm on Facebook. If you want to communicate with me, that's probably the best place. I occasionally get on Twitter and Instagram. But yeah, check out the website or hit me up on Facebook. Love to talk to readers and talk writing and publishing and just books in general.
Marisa?
MarisaWolf.net is the best place. If you want to see lots of pictures of my dogs, you can check me out on Instagram at bookdogs. I will talk about both books and dogs. So you get what it says on the tin.
And Grandpa Rod.
Hello. I love young people. Hello. I am on Facebook, author R.S. Belcher. I'm on Twitter. I do have an Instagram, but it's just pictures of food. I don't understand how to use Instagram well yet, so I probably never will.
Pictures.
I just started a YouTube channel in the last couple of months called The Knave of Pens with R.S. Belcher, and that's been going really well, and it's fun. We talk about writing. We talk about people who want to get into writing, and just pretty much anything else that, kind of have like little, sort of flashes, and we just start talking about in tongues. We speak in tongues sometimes. Those are all good ways to get a hold of me. I have a website. It's rsbelcher.net. It is a mess, but I'm in the middle of trying to make it look pretty. And that's how you get a hold of me. Or you can send a signal into the air.
That signal.
It's
There's a big misshapen head. That's my silhouette.
If you wave a bit of bourbon in the air in the right.
Oh, like a bottle. A bottle would be good. That would be a good symbol.
Waft it. Could be good.
And you're trying to be a moderator with this circus. I'm Jim Nettles. Again, you can find me at jamespnettles.com. You can find us at authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, and last but not least at continualconvention.com. And you can find me on Facebook as James P. Nettles III. There's also Jim Nettles, which occasionally I show up at, which was the writer of me. It's just too much like work. I show up on Twitter now and then, the hive and scum and villainy that it is.
Yes.
I show up on Instagram periodically, and pretty much all you see me talk about is writing, throwing heavy objects, and food, or beer, and what stupid things I'm doing lately. So, and so I want to give my panelists a huge round of thanks. I think there was a lot of great conversation here and a lot of things for people to take away. And thanks to the Fantasy Lit Track for letting us come and take over.
Yeah,
thank you for doing this, Jim.
So great.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you. You were great as a moderator. Really wonderful.
Yes.